Screams pierced the air as water bottles flew across tables and students scrambled in every direction. But this wasn't a natural disaster. This was karma, served hot and spicy. All of it started with one deceptively innocent container of Ruby Johnson's fire-glazed ghost pepper jerk chicken. Before we show you how she made them regret everything, hit that like button if you've ever wished karma could be served hot and poetic. Chloe Martinez, the 13-year-old queen bee with her perfectly styled blonde hair, clutched her throat as her face turned beet red. Sweat beaded on her forehead while tears streamed down her swollen cheeks. "Water!" she choked out desperately, her voice barely recognizable. "I need water!" At a nearby table, her right-hand girl Maddie Chen doubled over, her eyes watering so profusely she could barely see. The burning sensation in her mouth felt like liquid fire, spreading down her throat with each panicked breath. "It's burning!" she gasped. "It's burning!" Ashlyn Brooks, the third member of their crew, stumbled toward the lunch line like a person possessed, begging the cafeteria worker with the desperation of someone who just discovered what real spice could do. "Milk!" she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please, do you have milk?" The other students were a mix of reactions, some laughing at the spectacle, others gasping in shock, and many frantically pulling out their phones to record what would surely become the most legendary cafeteria moment in Roosevelt Middle School history. Ms. Rodriguez, a stern teacher in her 40s, pushed through the crowd of gawking students, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Everyone back up!" she shouted. "Who brought this food?" But at the far end of the room, sitting quietly at her usual table, was Ariel Johnson. The 13-year-old girl was calmly sipping her apple juice through a straw, her dark eyes steady and unblinking as she watched the scene unfold. There was no surprise on her face, no concern, no expression at all. Just calm, quiet justice. They had stolen from her every day for weeks, laughed at her food, mocked her culture, called her meals weird and exotic, while devouring every bite. So she had made them a special lunch, and they had devoured every bite of that too. 4 weeks earlier, moving to Roosevelt Middle School hadn't been Ariel's choice. Her mother had gotten a job transfer and called it an opportunity. But what she hadn't mentioned was that Ariel would be one of maybe 10 black kids in the entire school. The building was pristine and intimidating, with manicured lawns and modern architecture that screamed privilege. Students arrived in cars that cost more than most families' annual income. Ariel had always been quiet but observant, and as she walked through the main entrance on her first day, she took in everything. The way students clustered in their exclusive groups, the way teachers smiled politely but kept their distance, the way she seemed to become invisible the moment she stepped into any room. Her grandmother, Ruby Johnson, had taught her that food was love made visible. Every meal Ariel learned to prepare carried stories, recipes passed down through generations, seasoned with history and hope. When she sat down in the cafeteria that first day and opened her vintage tin container, the aroma of golden cornbread, perfectly seasoned chicken, and collard greens that glistened with care filled the air around her. The food smelled like home, like her grandmother's kitchen, like love itself. For a moment, as she took her first bite, Ariel smiled. But she wasn't the only one who noticed the incredible smell wafting from her lunch. At a nearby table, Chloe Martinez watched with the calculating gaze of someone who saw everything as territory to claim. "Look at the new girl," she whispered to her friends Maddie and Ashlyn. "That food actually smelled good." Maddie scrunched her nose. "It's so different. Like really different." Ashlyn leaned forward conspiratorially. "I wonder if she'd share. I mean, my mom just packed me another sad turkey sandwich." Ariel continued eating, unaware that she was being watched, analyzed, and already marked as a target. By the second week, the pattern had established itself. Ariel would sit at her usual table by the windows, carefully unpacking her lunch. Today, it was jerk chicken with rice and beans, and sweet potato bread that was still warm from the morning. She had just opened her container when Chloe approached with her crew, putting on her most charming smile. "Hey, you're Ariel, right? I'm Chloe." Her voice dripped with fake sweetness. That food looks amazing. Ariel looked up, cautious but trying to be polite. Thank you. My grandmother taught me to cook. That's so cool. Chloe's eyes lit up with false enthusiasm. You people really do season your food, huh? Like I can smell it from across the room. The words hung in the air like a slap. You people. Ariel's grip tightened on her fork, but she didn't respond. She had learned early in life to pick her battles, and this didn't feel like one she could win. Maddie leaned in closer, her eyes fixed on the beautifully prepared meal. Could I maybe try just a tiny bite? I've never had food like this before. Ariel hesitated. Something felt off about the request, but she had been raised to be generous, to share when asked politely. She nodded reluctantly and cut off a small piece of chicken. Sure, just a small piece. But Maddie took the fork and cut off a much larger portion than what Ariel had intended. Then Ashlyn did the same. Then Chloe, who had somehow positioned herself as the leader of this impromptu taste-testing session. Oh wow, this is actually really good, Chloe said, chewing thoughtfully. It's so exotic. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, spicy, but in a good way. Ashlyn added, taking another bite without asking. Before Ariel knew what was happening, half her meal was gone. She sat there, watching these girls consume her grandmother's recipes, like they were entitled to them, like her culture was their entertainment. I should probably save some for later, Ariel said quietly, trying to reclaim what was left of her lunch. Chloe laughed, a sound that was supposed to be friendly, but felt cruel. Oh, come on, sharing is caring, right? Besides, you brought so much. Ariel looked down at her nearly empty container. She hadn't brought much at all. This was supposed to be her entire lunch, and now she'd be hungry for the rest of the day. That was the first day, and Ariel had thought maybe it was just curiosity, just girls being friendly in their own way. She was wrong. The daily theft became as routine as morning announcements. Ariel would unpack her lunch, and within minutes Chloe and her crew would appear like vultures circling carry-on. Can we try some? Became, thanks for sharing, without any actual permission being granted. Ariel's portions grew smaller as the girls took more, and she found herself going hungry more often than not. Students at other tables watched the daily ritual, but said nothing. Teachers walked by, oblivious to this systematic harassment happening right under their noses. The cafeteria became a theater of daily humiliation, with Ariel as the unwilling star. This smells weird, but I'll try it anyway, Chloe would say during one lunch, her nose wrinkled in theatrical disgust before she took a large bite. You know, to be culturally sensitive. Ariel's jaw tightened. She was learning to recognize the microaggressions wrapped in fake compliments, the way they could insult and consume her culture simultaneously. My mom could never make anything like this, Maddie said another day, helping herself to a generous portion of Ariel's homemade mac and cheese. She's too busy with her book club. You're so lucky your people know how to cook. Each comment was a small cut, death by 1,000 microaggressions. Every day they took a little more. Not just her food, but her dignity, her heritage, her right to exist peacefully in that space. And every day, Ariel said nothing, swallowing her anger along with her hunger. 3 weeks into the routine, Ariel sat at her table, unpacking what looked like a smaller lunch than usual. She had made cornbread that morning, still warm and fragrant, and had some leftover mac and cheese that her grandmother had taught her to make with 5 different cheeses. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Chloe and her crew approached with even less pretense than usual. The fake politeness was wearing thin, replaced by an entitlement that made Ariel's stomach turn. Ooh, what did you bring us today? Chloe asked, not even bothering to sit down before reaching for the cornbread. Actually, I didn't bring much today, Ariel said firmly, something new in her voice. I kinda need to eat this. Chloe's laugh was sharp and mocking. Oh, come on, don't be selfish. You always bring enough. But Ariel stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. That's my lunch. I haven't eaten yet. Maddie had already grabbed the container of mac and cheese and was taking a large spoonful. "This is so good. What's in it?" "There's plenty," Ashlyn said, taking the cornbread despite Ariel's protests. "Stop being dramatic." That's when it happened. Whether by accident or by cruel design, Maddie knocked the remaining cornbread off the table. Ariel watched in horror as her grandmother's recipe, made with love and care that morning, hit the dirty cafeteria floor with a soft thud. Maddie and Ashlyn erupted into laughter. "Oops," Maddie giggled. 5-second rule?" Chloe shrugged with practiced indifference. "Why bring food if you can't share like a normal person? Maybe pack more next time." Ariel stared at her grandmother's cornbread on the floor, surrounded by the laughter of girls who had just destroyed something precious. Something inside her broke, not her spirit, but her willingness to remain silent. She quietly packed up her empty containers and walked away, leaving the girls laughing behind her. In the bathroom, locked in a stall, Ariel finally allowed herself to cry. As tears streamed down her face, she remembered her grandmother's words. "When the truth burns, it doesn't need volume." That evening, Ruby Johnson found her granddaughter in the kitchen, silently unpacking her untouched containers. Ruby was a small but formidable woman with wise eyes and gentle hands that had seen decades of struggle and triumph. "Baby, you've been coming home with full containers for days now," Ruby said, settling into the chair across from Ariel. "What's going on?" Ariel tried to hold it together, but her grandmother's gentle voice broke through her defenses like a warm embrace. The whole story poured out. The fake compliments, the microaggressions, the daily theft, the way teachers ignored it, the way other students looked away, the way she had been made to feel grateful that these girls even deigned to try her exotic food. "They act like I should thank them for taking my food and calling it weird," Ariel said through her tears. "Like I should be honored that they're being culturally sensitive by stealing my lunch every day." Ruby listened to every word, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. When Ariel finished, her grandmother reached across the table and held her hands. "You know what, baby?" Ruby said softly, but there was something new in her voice, something that spoke of generations of women who had learned to fight back in their own ways. "Maybe it's time we cooked them something they won't forget." "What do you mean?" Ariel asked, looking up through her tears. Ruby's smile was knowing, carrying the wisdom of someone who had faced similar battles in her own youth. "Sometimes the best way to teach respect is to let folks learn the hard way. You trust your grandma?" Ariel nodded, seeing something both gentle and fierce in her grandmother's eyes. "When the truth burns, it doesn't need volume," Ruby said quietly, echoing the words that had been running through Ariel's mind. That night, Ruby and Ariel worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing what looked like ordinary jerk chicken. But Ruby was adding special ingredients, ghost pepper powder, Scotch bonnet glaze, and other seriously spicy elements that would make even the most experienced spice lover think twice. "This recipe came from your great-great-grandmother," Ruby explained as she carefully measured the ghost pepper powder. "She used it during the civil rights movement when folks would try to take her food at sit-ins, thinking they could intimidate her by eating what she brought." "What happened?" Ariel asked, mixing the Scotch bonnet glaze with the concentration of someone learning a family secret. Ruby chuckled, a sound that held decades of satisfaction. "Let's just say, after one bite, they learned to respect what wasn't theirs. When the truth burns, it doesn't need volume." They worked in comfortable silence, the kitchen filling with the aroma of serious spice. This wasn't just cooking. This was preparation for a lesson that had been decades in the making. "Now listen carefully," Ruby said, her voice taking on the tone of someone passing down important wisdom. "This isn't about revenge. This is about teaching respect. You don't offer this to anyone. You don't share it. You make it clear this is yours and yours alone." "And if they take it anyway?" Ariel asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then they learn something about consequences," Ruby said simply. Ariel packed the meal in a clean container, then wrote a sticky note in her clearest handwriting. "If it ain't yours, don't touch it." She placed it prominently on the lid, a warning that would either be heeded or ignored at the reader's own peril. The next morning, Ariel walked into the cafeteria with a calmness that felt different from her usual quiet resignation. She sat at her usual table and placed the container prominently in front of her. The sticky note was clearly visible, impossible to miss. When Chloe and her crew approached, there was an edge to their usual entitlement. They had grown comfortable with their daily theft, secure in the knowledge that Ariel would never fight back. "If it ain't yours, don't touch it," Chloe read aloud, scoffing. "Someone's feeling sassy today." Maddie was already reaching for the container. "What's the big deal? We always share." "Actually," Ariel said, her voice steady and clear, "you always take." "There's a difference." But they weren't listening. They never listened. Ashlyn had already opened the container, inhaling deeply. "Oh, wow, this smells incredible. Way better than usual." Chloe took the first bite, her face initially showing pleasure at the rich, complex flavors. For a moment, she looked almost appreciative. "This is actually really good. The spice is—" Then it hit her. The expression on her face changed from pleasure to confusion to dawning horror as the heat built in her mouth like a volcanic eruption. What is this?" she gasped, but Maddie and Ashlyn were already taking their own generous bites. "It's amazing. So flavorful," Maddie began, but the words died in her throat as the ghost pepper began its work. The heat didn't just build, it exploded. All three girls realized simultaneously that they had made a terrible mistake. The spice wasn't just hot, it was nuclear, a level of heat that transformed their mouths into furnaces and their throats into burning tunnels of regret. "Water!" Ashlyn screamed, panic overtaking her as she scrambled toward the lunch line. "I need water!" But water would only make it worse, spreading the oils around their mouths instead of cooling them down. They needed milk, ice cream, anything with fat content to absorb the capsaicin that was now wreaking havoc on their taste buds. The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Students were recording, laughing, gasping in shock at the spectacle unfolding before them. The three girls who had terrorized Ariel for weeks were now red-faced, swollen, and crying as they begged for relief that wouldn't come easily. "What did you do?" Chloe managed to choke out between gasps, her face streaming with tears. "What did you do?" Through it all, Ariel remained perfectly calm, sitting at her table with the same serene expression she had worn while watching their daily theft. She took a sip of her apple juice and looked at the chaos with the satisfaction of someone who had finally seen justice served. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite the commotion. "I brought my lunch. You chose to take it." Ms. Rodriguez pushed through the crowd of students, her face a mask of concern and confusion. She saw the three girls in obvious distress and immediately turned to Ariel with accusation in her eyes. "What happened here?" she demanded. "Did you bring this food?" Ariel stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite the chaos around her. "Yes, I brought my lunch. For me. Not for anyone else." "What did you put in it?" Ms. Rodriguez asked, her tone implying that Ariel had done something wrong. "Seasonings," Ariel replied, meeting the teacher's eyes without flinching. "Same as always. It wasn't meant for anyone but me. But if you steal someone's food—" She paused, letting the lesson sink in. "That's your own lesson to learn." The crowd of students began to murmur, and something shifted in the atmosphere. Jaden Martinez, a quiet 14-year-old who had been watching this daily harassment for weeks, suddenly stood up. "She's been taking Ariel's food for weeks," he called out loudly, holding up his phone. "Every day. I've been recording it." Other students began to nod and speak up, their voices growing stronger as they realized they were no longer alone in their observations. "I saw it too. They were really mean about it. They made those comments about her people and stuff. They never asked permission. They just took it." Ms. Rodriguez looked around the cafeteria, finally seeing the pattern she had missed for weeks. The evidence was overwhelming, not just in Jaden's videos, but in the testimony of dozens of students who had witnessed the daily theft. "I need to understand what's been happening here," she said, her tone shifting from accusation to investigation. Ariel straightened her shoulders and spoke with the quiet dignity that had carried her through weeks of harassment. "I've been bringing my lunch to school the same way every student does. But every day, those girls would take it. Not ask, not share fairly. Take it. They'd make comments about my culture, my food, my family. Then they'd eat what they had just insulted." She paused, looking around the cafeteria at the faces of her classmates, many of whom were nodding in agreement. "Today, I brought my lunch for me. I labeled it clearly. They chose to take it anyway. What happened to them is what happens when you take something that doesn't belong to you." Their parents were called. The footage reviewed. The verdict was clear. Harassment, theft, and entitlement. Suspensions followed. But that wasn't the real victory. 1 week later, the atmosphere in the cafeteria had completely transformed. Ariel sat at her usual table, but she wasn't alone. Jaden sat across from her, along with Maya and Carlos, 2 other students who had been moved by her quiet strength to reach out in friendship. She was unpacking her lunch, normal food this time, no ghost peppers, and actually offering to share with her new friends. "My grandmother made extra cornbread," she said, smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Anyone want some?" "That would be amazing," Maya replied gratefully. In the background, Chloe, Maddie, and Ashlyn passed by, eating their own lunches and talking quietly among themselves. Their heads were down, the dynamic completely shifted. They had learned their lesson about respect, consequences, and the difference between sharing and taking. "You know," Carlos said, leaning in conspiratorially, "what you did was legendary." Ariel looked around the cafeteria, at the students who now nodded respectfully when they passed, at the teachers who were paying more attention to the subtle dynamics of harassment, at the real change that had rippled through the school's culture. "I learned that quiet doesn't mean weak," she said thoughtfully. "Sometimes the strongest response isn't the loudest one." She took a bite of her cornbread and smiled, surrounded by friends who saw her as a person, not as entertainment or a source of exotic food to be consumed without permission. Sometimes you have to let people taste their own medicine, or at least their own fire. And sometimes that's exactly what they need to learn the difference between sharing and stealing, between appreciation and appropriation, between respect and entitlement. Her grandmother had been right all along. When the truth burns, it doesn't need volume. It just needs the right moment to be tasted. The quiet girl had found her voice, not in shouting or confrontation, but in the simple act of setting boundaries and letting consequences teach their own lessons. And in doing so, she had transformed not just her own experience, but the entire culture of Roosevelt Middle School. If you've ever stayed silent just to survive, this story is for you. Sometimes the most powerful response is the quietest one, and sometimes the best lesson is the one that leaves a lasting impression, even if it burns a little.